From incredibly ancient pyramids to religious iconography of fanged feline beings, on through mummified elongated heads and wonderfully designed stirrup vessels, early South America isn't lacking. In this video, we'll explore the story of the early towns and later urban sites of South America up to around 200 BC. Before exploring the earliest towns, we'll first encounter the earliest widely accepted evidence of human habitation in South America. Then we'll engage the towns of the Peruvian coast from around 3200 BC, through the fall and rise of different cultural types, the introduction of ceramics, the great site of Chavin De Huantar, and finally into a period when monumental architecture receded and there arose more defense-minded hilltop sites. I found the source shown on screen an incredible help in preparing this video, and I left a link to it below. Humans had been in South America for some time by the time the first large-scale settlements emerged. These early towns, called cities by some for reasons I'm unsure of, began to emerge around 3100 BC after more than 10,000 years of human habitation in South America, and according to some, significantly more than 10,000 years of habitation there. The earliest widely accepted evidence of human habitation in South America comes in the form of some people staying at Monteverde, Chile. In Monteverde Layer 2, found in association with mastodon bones, is evidence of human settlement going back to 14,900 years ago. Located 36 miles from the ocean, this group of humans at Monteverde comprised of some 20 to 30 people living in tent huts made of wooden posts and mastodon hides. There were numerous hearths, and each tent had a clay-lined pit inside. There are arguments for sites earlier than Monteverde Level 2, including in fact a lower level at Monteverde itself. Another example includes a controversial claim placing humans at Pedra Furada, Brazil 32,000 years ago. Perhaps the conversation will solidify into a picture of far longer human habitation in South America across time. Watch this space. After Monteverde, a notable consideration is the first appearance of pottery around 8,000 years ago, 6,000 BC, at a number of sites in the vicinity of and including Caverna de Pedra Pintada, far east to where the first pottery-free towns would develop. Later finds bring pottery ever closer to the soon-to-be early towns, reaching the western coast by around 4,500 years ago, 2,500 BC. And even then, it would be hundreds of years before the coastal towns of Peru will be meeting sauntered into the ceramic scene. South America is also host to the earliest mummies of human history, the Chinchorro mummies of the Atacama Desert. The earliest of these mummies predate those of Egypt by some 2,000 years, dating to 7,000 years ago. The dead bodies would have their skin and organs, including the brain, removed. The body would be put back inside, stuffed some, and had wooden sticks inserted to maintain their rigid, straight form. Now let's focus in on fairly large stone-built towns in the Andean region, with the earliest picking up before 3000 BC. Centered around the four river valleys of the Fortaleza, Pativilca, Supe, and Huara, these towns did not have pottery and many had communal architecture. As for the towns further inland, away from the coastal fishing towns, irrigation ditches were used to drive their agricultural productivity. The river valley towns and the coastal fishing towns had a trade network, and the agricultural productivity of the river valley towns allowed their coastal counterparts to focus on fishing. Beyond the caloric benefits of agriculture, there was also the crucial for fishing nets cotton, which was also planted in abundance. There were also some settlements higher up, which we'll consider first when taking a look at some of these settlements. In all of these places, there's no evidence of significant social stratification, with an elite class living in larger homes and/or buried with elaborate grave goods, and there's also no evidence of warfare, with these towns seemingly existing without fear of attack. Katash and La Galgada were both highland sites that relied heavily on hunting for their food, with plenty of deer and camelid bones showing up in excavations. In the center of Katash are two terraced platforms dating from at least 2500 BC, and the population may have been as many as 3,000 people. People were buried underneath their homes with very little grave goods if they were buried with anything at all. From Katash, there is something that may well be a religious type of symbol on the front of the accordingly named Temple of the Crossed Hands, dating from at least 1800 BC. Caral was located in the Supe Valley, and covering 60 hectares, it is the largest of the inland towns. Across time, many other towns arose in the Supe Valley, peaking the population of the river valley at possibly as much as 20,000 people. But Caral is perhaps the earliest of these cities, starting around 3100 BC. Caral itself came to have a population of at least 3,000, and archaeologist Ruth Shady found what may well be a quipu or proto-quipu in Caral as well, the earliest quipu in existence. Another inland town, 25 miles inland across the Chillon River Valley, this one established late in the pre-ceramic period, is Buena Vista. Buena Vista provides one of the great cultural artifacts of this period, with a mural depicting a fox in the womb of a llama found well inside the so-called Temple of the Fox. A more ominous monument is found in the neighboring Temple of the Menacing Disc, where a sculpture of an unhappy face sits. These temples are aligned to the summer solstice and the winter solstice, respectively. Aspero is a coastal town located at the mouth of the Supe River. It dates to at least as early as 2800 BC. One large structure in Aspero is this pyramidal platform mound, where you can see stairs leading up to the top, where there were a number of rooms. The base itself didn't contain rooms or burials, and in front is a sunken circular plaza. El Paraiso, picking up around 2000 BC, is the largest of the pre-ceramic coastal towns, covering 58 hectares of land. Around 1800 BC, around the same time that pottery made its way into Peru, the Norte Chico towns were abandoned, and settlements in river valleys to the north and south, now with pottery, are growing. These towns are further inland and had larger irrigation ditches than their pre-ceramic predecessors, and along with having fewer coastal fishing settlements, the towns of these cultures were more reliant on crops as their food source than the earlier Norte Chico. Their monumental architecture generally differed regionally, with over 20 of the towns in the south having northeast-oriented U-shaped complexes consisting of a central pyramidal structure and two flanking platform mounds, while those in the north had sunken circular plazas. Starting in the north, there are a number of towns, some covering over 100 hectares of land. One notable site is that of Cerro Sechin, which, while not having monumental architecture of the size of Moxique or Sechin Alto, the first indications of institutional violence appears in the form of sculpted images depicting warriors holding weapons as well as the severed heads of victims. Now moving down south, one of these U-shaped complex having sites is Garrigues, located in the valley of the Rimac River and notable for the polychrome friezes found there. Some other southern sites include Cardal, Mina Perdida, and Huaca La Florida. Many of these sites were abandoned around 900 BC, but one site that got started a couple of hundred years prior and now flourished through the coming period is that of Chavin De Huantar, located in the Andes almost 3,200 meters above sea level. Chavin De Huantar picked up perhaps as early as 1200 BC, coming to flourish from 800 to 500 BC before declining. Early on in this time, along the coast of Peru, we find sites producing Cupis Nike pottery, which have some sheared artistic styles and imagery as that found at Chavin. Many of these are stirrup vessels with a diverse array of styles and designs. These sites too decline around 900 BC, and we turn our attention to Chavin De Huantar. At Chavin, we find significant religious iconography, and it may have started out as a ceremonial center, having as it did a very small early population of likely less than 500 people. Across time, the site grew, with Chavin coming to house perhaps as many as 3,000 people. Chavin's early stage is marked by the Old Temple, which is reminiscent of the other U-shaped complexes, but different in two ways. For one, all three parts of the U-shape are conjoined, not separate as they were earlier. Second, within the structure itself, you find many corridors, some leading to rooms where apparent offerings are made, and at the end of one corridor is the 4.5-meter tall Lanzone stela. Further, found in front of the pyramidal structure and between the two flanking arms of the U is a sunken circular plaza, along which are two registers of carved stone panels. One of these panels is the stela of the cactus bearer, in which a fanged humanoid entity is holding out a San Pedro cactus, the cactus which brings us the hallucinogen mescaline. Beyond the Old Temple, off of its right-hand side, a new temple called the New Temple is constructed around 500 BC. Interestingly, the sunken plaza in front of it isn't circular but rectangular. Perhaps the most important monument of the New Temple is the Raimundi stele, depicting what is often called the Staff God. Already by this time, Chavin-inspired, or at least Chavin milieu cultural typological art can be found across a wide area of highland and coastal sites. Over the coming couple of centuries, Chavin's population grew significantly and its religious monumental architecture seemingly came to be irrelevant as the residents first encroached nearer to the temples and eventually came to recycle temple stones to build their residences, with some residences built directly atop the Old Temple circular plaza. Moving south of Chavin, there's a culture that temporally overlaps some with Chavin and which provides us with a great amount of art and imagery. Much of this art is found in textiles which had been wrapped around their mummies. This Paracas culture initially arose in the region perhaps around 1000 BC. The mummies are found interred in the Paracas Peninsula and are split into two stages. The earlier stage, dating from 1000 to 500 BC, sees piles of hundreds of mummies at the bottom of shaft tombs, and the mummies are wrapped in bundles of textiles with jewelry and ceramics included in these wraps. Hundreds of these early-stage mummies have elongated skulls, perhaps brought about through tying boards to the heads of these people from infancy, shaping and possibly even aiding in spurring the greater growth of these skulls. Some of these deformed skulls have semi-healed boreholes within them, seemingly reflecting attempts at surgical trepanation. For the second stage, dating from 500 to 200 BC, we see a change in burial practices, as now the shaft tombs are made beneath individual homes and they would be closed up after only a few mummies were interred there. The Paracas textiles we have, along with their ceramics, offer a relatively wide window into their iconography. And let's take a moment to bask in their glory for a bit. While the Paracas had entered into the stage of burying mummies immediately beneath their pit homes, and Chavin De Huantar entered into decline, we start seeing increased activity in a number of river valleys, such as the Mochi, Nepena, Santa, and Cosma valleys. We've already seen imagery of warriors, and we've seen the many decapitated heads of the Paracas, but now institutional violence is more readily reflected in the organization of the settlements. Walled towns built upon ridgetops are built, and both actual and artistic renderings of maceheads have been found. Communal monumental architecture, those pyramids and platform mounds, are no longer features, and the emergence of an elite with greater-sized homes is clear. With early South America behind us, when we return to South America next, the Nazca and Mochi will garner our interest. But for the next video, my intention is to learn about Central America's early civilizational history and the Olmecs more particularly.